My goal is to leave behind an overview of my life and work with selected photographic, videographic, and written representations of our children, grandchildren, and other relatives and loved ones. I want to put highlights from the time Hertha and I got married until we had children, our lives with our children and grandchildren until present. What I really want to demonstrate is that retirement is not going home and sleeping, but it is to continue to construct and reconstruct the past, the present, and the future. Most important things are the human connections, both now and over time.
We are here to celebrate our beloved Edgar Klugman's 90th birthday in preparation for his 100th. He is an amazing man, born 90 years ago tomorrow on September 13th, 1925. From a young age, his favorite things to do included building with boxes, going to the train station. He went to a Froebelian kindergarten, which focuses on play experiences. This school experience informed the rest of his life and continues to inspire his work to this day. He was very close to his cousin Ruth. He would sneak into Ruth and her sisters, Judith and Taya's, playroom to play with their fancy dolls and carriages. In Bamberg, where their grandparents lived, he would ride their bikes even though they were girls' bikes. The cousins called Ed Edgardina. Ruth and Ed also liked to play a special game together, Doctor. Edgar also loved the Transportation Museum. He loved to visit the gypsies when they were camped at the freight yard at the end of Essenweinstrasse, where he lived in Nuremberg. He had a frog who loved to eat flies. He could tell the weather. When the frog climbed up, it would be sunny. When he was down, it would rain.
When Ed was 9 years old, his family moved to Zuferstrasse. He lived in this house. His cousin, Lucy Plout, and her husband, Julius, and later her daughter Helen, lived right down the street. He helped take care of baby Helen, and later in life became her legal guardian, greatly improving her quality of life, after her mother passed away in Chicago. Hans and Ed were next-door neighbors and friends. Ed loved to play with the electric train set that Hans had. They were good friends until the Nazis took over Germany. Hans's father joined the Brown Shirt SA group, and they were forbidden to play together. Here is the story of Ed's experience escaping Nazi Germany, told for the first time in public this year when he was a finalist in the Mass Mouth Story Slam competition.
Think back when you were 13 years old. Can go back that far. You had a beard. Your voice changed. Remember all that? You loved girls. Well, there were all kinds of wonderful things that happened at 13. but I lived in Nazi Germany.
Coming to America was an adventure from the very start.
My mother equipped me well with names and addresses, and where possible, phone numbers. Well, Academy 2366, my brothers in New York City. When we arrived, when Britannic pulled in on 57th Street to land at the Cunard White Star Pier, the phones were connected. I called the phone number. I said, "I say, could I talk to Werner, please," in my best British accent. And Mrs. Weiss answered where Werner lived and said, "Wyness at Wyke." I said, "I can't understand you." And I turned it over to the waiter, and he then talked to her. And I said to him, "Tell her he should come down and get me at the pier." Well, she called somebody at his office. He worked in a paint factory, and the receptionist gave him the message. But you know what? It was April 1st, 1940. And he said, "Yeah, April Fool's Day." He had been told to find left-handed wrenches and looked all over the paint factory and couldn't find them. He didn't believe that I was here. So it wasn't until 5 o'clock in the evening or afternoon that he came and called for me with my suitcase. And that was my arrival in the United States.
One of the most impressive things that Ed saw in his first months in the U.S. was the World's Fair, which displayed the 4 freedoms of the U.S. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom from want, and freedom of the press. However, after his experiences in Germany, it was hard for Ed to believe that these freedoms were real. When he was riding the subway, he saw a man reading a Hebrew newspaper and thought, why is he bringing anti-Semitic trouble upon himself and all of us Jews on the train? It took some time before he really believed that America was a safer place.
Ed always loved Shirley Temple. He wanted to be like her. He thought she was born in Germany because she always spoke German in the German movie theaters. It wasn't until he arrived in the United States that he realized that she was actually an American actress. He decided to go after his dream in this new land of opportunity and the 4 freedoms and pursue acting.
I heard that Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer was in New York City. So I walked from 101st Street, where I lived, to 23rd Street, where Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer was located, in a very tall building. I wanted to offer my services to them. And I went up in the elevator. I got to the door of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. I wanted to turn the knob, but then fear overcame me, and that was the end of my career with Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, and I had to leave.
When his dream of being an actor did not quite come to fruition at that time, he decided to work in the new family business, Liberty Brand Cookie Company. It was a bakery his father had started. Among other things, they baked Lebkuchen, a special recipe that Edgar had brought over from Germany in the family recipe book with him on the Kindertransport. Making Lebkuchen and marzipan is a family tradition that Ed has now passed down to both his daughters and granddaughters. When he was 18 years old, he entered the army. He was shipped to Italy to be placed on the front lines of the Fifth Army. His brother, Werner, a sergeant, appeared in his tent one night. Werner had been searching for his little brother Ed for some time now, and Werner negotiated a position for Ed as an interrogator of German prisoners of war because he was fluent in German. This change of work in the army probably saved his life.
But Werner was in he could see the incoming regiments, the troops that were coming in, and he spied Ed's name on an incoming list of those who were going to be cannon fodder, basically. So Werner borrowed the Jeep, and got permission to go, and they said that he could get you out of there. But apparently, when he came to the camp where you were in a tent engaged in carnal knowledge with someone. He said, and he came knocking on the tent, and you were like, "Go away, go away." He was like, "No, I'm not."
Upon returning from the war, he enrolled at New York University with the goal of becoming a teacher.
When I went to my first class in American Life and Culture at New York University, I promptly sat in the front row, and the instructor said, "Hey, you two men in the front row, would you look at your IBM cards?" And I looked at my IBM card, and we both did. And he said, "Are you sure you're in the right class?" And the guy next to me said, "Oh my God, I'm in the wrong class." He walked out, and there left me with 25 women. And that was the beginning of my teaching career.
It was there, at New York University, that he first saw his future wife, Hertha Ann Slavson, soon to be Klugman. It took some time to convince her father, Samuel Slavson, that the German boy was a mensch. Very soon, though, Samuel Slavson, along with the entire Slavson Goldsmith family, could easily recognize Ed's kind heart and creative spirit, and he was warmly embraced into the family. Ed received his doctorate from Columbia University Teachers College and was given the opportunity to take his wife to Afghanistan. It took even longer to convince Hertha's father that the married couple should move to Afghanistan, but move they did. Ed and Hertha both worked as teachers for most of their lives, helping to enrich the lives of young children. Hertha first taught in the Glen Oaks Nursery School in Queens. Ed's first teaching job was in Great Neck, New York. During this early stage in his career, he made the now famous 8mm film Chatterbox to show the daily life of the students in his progressive third-grade classroom.
Clean. Here, the care of the Rooster Committee is removing the old straw from the cage and replacing it. Has composed a story about the rooster and has put the story into a chart. Here the children have illustrated their story. Chart reading is fun and develops many good attitudes toward reading.
My father came out of his open heart surgery and he was in the ICU the first time. And there was a nurse there. And I don't know if you remember this, but she was from Harrison and you and she were talking about, she had a kid at the Harrison school.
Ed soon became a principal of an elementary school in Schenectady, New York. It was near there, in Niskayuna, that Ed and Hertha's first daughter, Carrie, was born. 2.5 years later, baby Tammy joined the family. Ed was now both a caring father and a magical uncle, as his nieces always knew him.
Ed and his family moved to Boston in 1970 and bought their family home on Kirkstall Road, which later became Sage and Thyme Bed and Breakfast. Ed worked at Wheelock College, where he had a huge impact on countless students and policymakers. He influenced the education and future of young children nationwide by teaching early childhood educators and policymakers. He was influential in child and family policy and play on an international level. Sailing was a great way to relax and get away from it all. Ed pursued it with his usual passion and creativity.
Sailing was always a hope and aspiration. When Hertha and I first courted, we learned to push the sailboat along the shoreline. Soon we learned how you have to rig the boat and sail away. Our very first boat was a Sprite, all of 12 feet long. We tried to sail out of the Hingham Harbor. It was so easy to sail out, but when Hertha said, "Let's try and get back," we found out there are tides that you must deal with. We had to wait 4 hours before we could return into the harbor. That was a hard way to learn about tides, but we never forgot it again. Our second boat was the Water Spider. This was a twin-keeled boat that could stand up when the tide went out. What a joy! We kept it tied up right outside of our good friend Lena Foster's house in Annisquam. Eventually, we got a mooring for the boat and a dinghy. Then big times ahead. We moved up to a 21-foot Tanza named Anticipation. It had a cabin, so much to learn. I took the Coast Guard boating courses, learning how to chart, take care of the engine, and much more. Our biggest trips were to visit my brother Werner in Martha's Vineyard and to visit Hertha's cousin, Ann Goldsmith, up in Tennant's Harbor, Maine. When the time came to no longer own a boat, we sold each boat with visiting and sailing privileges. We visited Anticipation in Canada, where it was built, and had fun sailing with its new owner.
While working at Wheelock College, Ed became aware of Steven Spielberg's project, the Shoah Foundation, which worked to record experiences of Holocaust survivors. This was the first time the whole family heard his complete story. Throughout their lives together, Ed and Hertha always made exploring the world a priority. From retrofitting their car to take their honeymoon across the country, to various camping trips around North America, there was often a trip to be taken. Some other trips included taking the family to Iceland.
In the summer of 1973, Hertha and Ed decided to take a trip with their 2 daughters to Iceland. They landed in Reykjavik, rented a small car, and drove us to the family farm B&B in the hills of Iceland. After we had stayed there for a couple of nights, we decided to go camping, so we camped out in all of these different fields. One of the fields was where they were celebrating the oldest democracy of any of the countries, in Thingvellir. We also got to go in caves where they split the cave in half, and women went into one side and men went into the other, completely naked. There were the hot pots that were mineral baths, and we could go in there and sit and get rid of any aches and pains. And of course, the slot machines where we would put in a krona and we would get out many krona. And we were enjoying crystals, and we were enjoying all kinds of new experiences for 3 whole weeks.
We went traveling every Christmas to Puerto Rico. Even when Ed and Hertha were returning from Afghanistan, Ed went to Israel to celebrate their 10th Independence Day. Later, he went back to Israel with Takara for her 13th birthday, and still later he went to Israel with Aubrey, Hannah, and Carrie. Ed and Hertha spent time in the Galapagos, and Ed even took the whole family to Germany to reconnect with our roots.
In 1997, Hertha was diagnosed with cancer. I decided to once more support my wife and take a sabbatical year in San Francisco, California. We stayed with Peggy Lepore, Hertha's cousin. Hertha was treated by an alternative psychotropic surgeon. He warned her that the cancer might be too progressed for his treatments to eradicate it. It was the first time that I ever thought holographically. Hertha really took a courageous chance, broadening her outlook about life and healing. Healing was a much broader concept than we originally thought. Hertha was introduced to this healer by her sister Gerda. Gerda called on a Friday and said that there's a man in California who does holistic healing. All the family came out and said goodbye. We celebrated Hertha's life and remembered her together. We each took turns being with her, and I was with her when she died. My hand was on her back. It was a reassuring experience for me. My brother came, the nieces came. It was family.
After he, quote, retired, unquote, Ed co-founded Playing for Keeps and helped it grow into the Leadership Initiative for the Association of Children's Museums. It's also known as PFK. Since retiring, Ed has been busier than ever to bring about the more beautiful world his heart knows is possible. He has most recently been involved with the slow living movement, which he shares with his children and grandchildren. He has been instrumental in the creation of Project READ, an intergenerational collaborative program. He is also an active leader in Bridges Together, an intergenerational program which builds bridges between and among generations. In addition to all of the above, Ed is working hard on one of his latest projects, Healing and Reconciliation. And of course, he owns his title as Emerging Storyteller from the Mass Mouth Story Slam Finals. Ed always has a passion for helping people, for visionary, innovative problem solving, for traveling and making friends everywhere he goes, for connecting with diverse people, community building, healing, and reconciliation, and keeping the family together. We love you, Ed, Baba, Pa, and happy birthday from us all.